The crowd was laughing, their voices echoing through the alien hall. Daniel stood in the center, his hands tied with a rough rope, his face hard but silent. He was a human soldier. Once proud, once respected, but now he was nothing more than a joke to them. The alien rulers had gathered everyone to witness his punishment. And they wanted the punishment to be cruel, humiliating, and unforgettable. One of the alien leaders stepped forward, his voice cold and mocking. "You think you are better than us, human," he said. "But now you will see what happens when pride is crushed." He raised his long hand and pointed toward a cage. The crowd grew louder, shouting, laughing, cheering as guards dragged the cage forward. Inside, curled up and shivering, was a small alien girl, her clothes torn, her body covered in dirt. The smell of filth filled the air, making even some of the crowd cover their noses. The alien leader smiled. "This," he said, "is your bride." Daniel's eyes widened for a moment, but he did not speak. The crowd roared with laughter, shouting insults. "She is worth no more than $5. One alien shouted. "A stinking slave for the proud human," another added. The hall shook with their cruel joy. The guards pulled the girl out of the cage, pushing her forward. Her eyes were empty, her steps weak, her hair tangled with mud. She looked more like a broken shadow than a living being. Her name was whispered by some in the crowd Lyra, a slave no one wanted. To them, she was worthless, less than nothing. Daniel kept his head straight, his jaw tight. Inside, anger burned, but he knew showing it would only give them more pleasure. The alien leader turned to him again. "You will marry her now," he said. "This is your punishment. Human, for daring to defy us." The crowd clapped, cheered, and whistled. Enjoying every second of his shame, Daniel was forced to kneel beside Lyra. The alien priest began the ritual, his voice deep, chanting in words Daniel barely understood. The people laughed after every line, spitting on the floor, mocking him. "This is what happens when you disobey," someone shouted. Another laughed. A warrior now chained to garbage. Lyra kept her head low, trembling as if she expected to be struck. She had been treated like an animal all her life, and now she believed nothing would change. When the ritual ended, the alien priest declared them married. The crowd cheered louder than before, their joy cruel and sharp. Daniel stood, his ropes cut, but his pride left in pieces. They thought they had broken him. They thought this punishment would destroy his soul. As they walked out of the hall together, Daniel glanced at Lyra. She was shaking, her eyes filled with fear and shame. He could hear the crowd still laughing behind them, calling her names, mocking him. But inside Daniel's heart, a strange thought began to grow. This was supposed to be punishment, a curse, a humiliation that would haunt him forever. Yet as he looked at her, he felt something different. A quiet voice in his heart whispered that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The aliens believed they had chained a proud human warrior to a worthless slave. They believed he would live the rest of his life in misery. But Daniel knew one thing. He would never let them see him broken. He would never let them win. And as he looked at Lyra, standing weak and afraid beside him, he felt a promise forming in his chest. No matter how the world mocked them, no matter how cruel their fate seemed, he would protect her, and he would find out who she really was, because something in her eyes, hidden beneath all the dirt and pain, told him there was more to this $5 slave than anyone knew. The crowd thought they had seen the end of Daniel's pride, but in truth, they had just witnessed the start of a story that would change everything. Asterisk. The road back to the soldier barracks was silent. Daniel walked with heavy steps, Lyra following behind like a shadow. Her head stayed low, her shoulders hunched as if the whole world was pressing down on her. To anyone watching, it looked like a proud man dragging along a broken pet. But Daniel's eyes saw something different, something he could not yet explain. The guards who followed them laughed among themselves. "She is yours now, human," one sneered. "Enjoy the stink," another added. "Even rats would not share." Food with her. Daniel ignored their words, but he could feel Lyra shrinking further with every insult. When they finally reached the small room given to him as punishment, the guards shoved Lyra inside and slammed the door shut behind them. The room was simple, a bed in the corner, a small table, and one window covered with dust. Lyra stood frozen, afraid to move, her hands clutching her torn clothes as if they might disappear. Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed, tired from the long humiliation. He looked at her for a long moment, and then finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said. Lyra flinched at his words, as if even kindness could hurt. She whispered, barely audible, "Do you want me to serve you, master?" Her voice was cracked, dry, the voice of someone who had spoken mostly in fear all her life. Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't need a servant," he said. "I need you to sit, eat, rest." He pushed a small plate of bread toward her. Food he had saved for later. Her eyes widened with disbelief, as though no one had ever offered her food without beating her first. For a long moment she did not touch it. Then, slowly, her shaking hands reached for the bread. She ate with small bites, her eyes never leaving the floor. Daniel watched her quietly, and in her every movement he saw pain deeper than wounds. She was not just a slave, she was someone who had been taught she had no right to live. Night fell, and the room grew cold. Daniel gave her his blanket and slept without one. When she tried to return it, he refused. "Keep it," he said. "You need it more than me." Her eyes glistened, as if a memory long buried was fighting to return. But she said nothing, curling up on the floor beside the bed. Daniel wanted to tell her she could take the bed, but he knew she would refuse. For now he let it be. Days passed, and every day Daniel tried to break the silence between them. He asked her simple questions, her name, her age, where she came from. At first she answered only with short words, afraid to speak too much, but slowly her voice grew longer, softer, more alive. She told him her name was Lyra, though no one had called her by that in years. She had been sold many times, passed from hand to hand like an object. Every master saw only filth, only weakness, only a slave worth $5. None had ever seen the girl behind the dirt. Daniel listened, never mocking, never laughing, and each time he listened, she grew braver. One evening, when the moonlight filled the room, she whispered something she had never told anyone. "I was not born a slave," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel looked at her sharply, his eyes narrowing with surprise. She lowered her head, ashamed. "My family was noble once, before the war, before betrayal." Her hands shook as she spoke. "I saw them die, and then I was sold, piece by piece, until I became this." Tears slid down her face, but she did not wipe them. It was as if she believed her pain did not matter. Daniel's fists tightened, rage burning inside him, but he kept his voice calm, steady. "You are not garbage," he said. "Not to me." Lyra gasped, her eyes wide, staring at him as though his words were impossible. No one had ever told her she was worth more. No one had ever given her a name beyond slave. For the first time in years, she felt something stir in her heart. It was small, fragile, like a candle against the dark, but it was there, hope. The world outside still laughed at them, still mocked Daniel's punishment. To everyone else, he was a soldier chained to dirt. And she was dirt chained to him. But in the small room, with whispers under the moonlight, something else was forming, a bond neither of them expected. Daniel looked at her and saw not a slave but a wounded soul. Lyra looked at him and saw not a master but a man who treated her as human. They were both prisoners of a cruel fate, yet together they had begun to build the first step of freedom. And deep in her broken heart, Lyra began to wonder, maybe this punishment was not a curse. Maybe it was the first mercy she had been given in a very long time. The nights in the alien colony were long and cold. Daniel often sat awake, staring out of the dusty window, his mind heavy with questions. Why had fate tied him to this girl? This broken alien slave worth only $5. And why, every time? He looked at her. Did he feel there was more to her story than anyone knew? Lyra lay curled up on the floor near the bed, her breathing soft, but her body restless. She would shiver, sometimes whispering words in her sleep. Words Daniel could not understand. It was the language of her people. Forgotten by most, ignored by all. One night, when the moonlight poured through the window, Daniel spoke softly. "Tell me who you really are," he said, his voice quiet but firm. At first, Lyra pretended not to hear, but her trembling gave her away. He leaned closer. "You don't belong in chains. I can see it in your eyes." Her eyes opened slowly, fear glimmering inside them. "No one wants to know." She whispered, "When I spoke before, I was beaten." Daniel's voice was steady. "I am not them." For a long moment, silence filled the room, the kind of silence that felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening. Finally, Lyra sat up, her thin fingers twisting together nervously. "I was born in a palace," she whispered. "I had a family. I had teachers. I had dreams." Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "My father was a leader, a noble. He believed in peace between humans and my people, but he was betrayed." Her words came in broken pieces, but Daniel listened to each one. She told him how soldiers stormed her home, how her parents were killed before her eyes, how she was dragged away, sold to merchants, beaten until she forgot what it meant to be free. "They gave me new names," she whispered. "Dog, filth, garbage, never my real name, never Lyra." Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry loud, as if even her sorrow had been silenced long ago. Daniel's fists clenched, his chest burning with anger. To him, this was not just a story of a slave, it was the story of injustice, of cruelty. "You are not filth," he said firmly. "You are Lyra, and they can never take that away from you." Her lips trembled, her eyes wide, as if no one had ever said those words to her before. In that moment, something inside her shifted, as if a locked door in her heart had opened. But she was still afraid. "They will kill you if they hear you defend me," she said. "To them, I am less than nothing." Daniel shook his head. "Then let them come. I will not let them touch you." The next days became different, though the world outside still laughed at them. Inside the small room, a fragile trust began to grow. Lyra started to speak more, her words carrying pieces of her old self. She told Daniel about her world before chains, the gardens of her home, the music of her people, the stars she used to watch from the palace roof. Daniel listened to everything, storing each memory like treasure. Sometimes he even made her laugh, a soft, quiet laugh she had not known in years. It was not much, but it was enough to make the cold nights feel less heavy. But secrets do not stay hidden for long. One evening, while Daniel was away on duty, 2 alien guards barged into the room. They sneered at Lyra, grabbing her arms roughly. "You think you are noble still?" One mocked, "You are just a slave." She tried to stay silent. But when they pushed her to ground, anger flashed in her eyes. "You will regret this," she whispered, her voice carrying a strength she did not know she still had. The guards laughed. "The human pet has teeth," they said. Before leaving her bruised and shaken, when Daniel returned and saw her injuries, his fury was like fire. "Who did this?" he demanded, but Lyra only shook her head, afraid. "They will kill you if you fight them," she whispered. Daniel's eyes burned. "Then let them try," he said, his voice sharp as steel. That night, as they sat in silence, Lyra finally spoke again, her voice trembling but strong. "There is something else I must tell you," she whispered, "something I have never told anyone." Daniel leaned closer, his heart pounding. She took a long breath, then said, "I know the names of those who betrayed my father. I know where they hide. I know secrets they fear." Her eyes locked with his. "That is why they keep me alive. Not because I am worth $5, but because I carry knowledge worth a kingdom." Daniel's breath caught. For the first time, He understood the girl they had mocked, beaten, and sold as trash was holding a secret that could shake the colony itself. The punishment that was meant to ruin him had instead tied him to someone who carried power greater than anyone guessed. The darkness outside their room was filled with enemies, but inside, the truth had begun to shine, a truth that would change everything. The days after Lyra's confession were heavy with silence. Daniel could not forget her words, the secrets she carried, the names of traitors who had destroyed her family. He looked at her differently, now not as a punishment, not as a burden, but as someone important, someone dangerous to those in power. And he knew if the rulers discovered she had spoken to him, both their lives would be crushed without mercy. Lyra tried to return to her quiet routine, cleaning the small room, staying in the shadows, speaking little, but Daniel could see the fear in her eyes, the way she jumped at every knock on the door. She was carrying more than scars. She was carrying a secret that could ignite a fire in the entire colony. Rumors began to spread. The other soldiers whispered that Daniel had gone soft, that the human who once fought with pride now spent his nights caring for a filthy alien slave. The aliens mocked him openly, spitting at his feet. Look at the mighty warrior, they sneered. Sleeping beside garbage. Daniel ignored them. But each word cut deeper than steel. The rulers had wanted to humiliate him. But what angered them most was that he did not break. Instead, he seemed calmer, stronger, as if the punishment had given him something they could not understand. Inside the barracks, Lyra began to change slowly. She no longer sat in silence all day. She asked Daniel questions, simple ones at first, about the stars, about the human world. Daniel even taught her small words in his language, and she repeated them carefully, her lips forming shapes she had not spoken before. Her laughter, though rare, returned in tiny sparks, and Daniel guarded those moments as treasures. But outside their door, the world grew more hostile one evening. A group of soldiers cornered Daniel in the courtyard. Their leader, a man named Kellen, sneered. "You shame us all, Daniel." Daniel stared at him, silent, but Kellen's voice grew louder. "You defend a slave, you share food with filth. Do you want us to believe you have fallen in love with her?" The crowd laughed, throwing stones at his feet. Daniel's fists clenched, but he refused to strike. He knew one fight would give them an excuse to kill both him and Lyra. So he turned and walked away, though his heart burned like fire. When he entered his room, Lyra looked at him with wide eyes. "You are bleeding," she whispered, pointing to the cut on his cheek. "It is nothing," Daniel said, wiping it away. But she shook her head, her hands trembling as she touched his face gently. "They hate you because of me," she said, guilt filling her voice. Daniel caught her hands in his and held them firmly. "No," he said, "they hate me because I will not bow to them, and because I will not let them destroy you." Her eyes filled with tears, but in them was also something else, something like trust. That night, as the moonlight spilled across the floor, Lyra spoke again. "They will not stop," she whispered. "If they learn I told you the truth, they will kill us both." Daniel nodded. "Then we stay quiet, we wait, we watch." But in his heart, he knew silence would not be enough. Soon, an opportunity came. The alien rulers announced a celebration, a grand feast to remind everyone of their power. The soldiers whispered that Daniel would be forced to attend. Some laughed, saying he should bring his $5 bride to sit beside him. Daniel ignored their cruelty, but he knew the night would be dangerous. On the evening of the feast, Daniel left Lyra in the room, telling her to stay hidden. But before he walked out, she caught his arm, her voice shaking. "Be careful," she whispered. "They will try to provoke you." Daniel gave her a small smile. "I have faced worse," he said, yet inside, he knew she was right. At the feast, the hall glowed with firelight, the rulers sitting high upon their golden chairs. Food and wine spilled across the tables. Laughter filled the air, but beneath it, all was poison. Kellen and his men circled Daniel like wolves, their eyes sharp, their words dripping with venom. "So, where is your bride?" One sneered. "Did she run away like a rat?" Another laughed. "Or did she finally choke on her own stink?" The hall roared with cruel laughter. Daniel sat in silence, his jaw tight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of anger. But inside his chest, his fury was a storm. Far away, in the small room, Lyra sat by the window, staring at the stars. Her heart was restless, her hands trembling. She could almost hear the laughter from the hall, the mockery aimed at Daniel, and she whispered to herself, "Hold on, Daniel, do not let them break you." Back in the feast hall, Kellen finally slammed his cup on the table. His eyes locked on Daniel. "You are not one of us anymore," he shouted. "You belong with her, with filth, with garbage." The crowd roared, the rulers smiled, and Daniel, though calm on the outside, knew this was only the beginning. The tension was rising. The trap was closing, and both he and Lyra stood at the edge of something far greater than humiliation, something that could shatter the balance of the colony forever. The feast ended, but the whispers did not. Everywhere Daniel walked in the colony, eyes followed him, voices mocked him, and laughter stabbed at his pride. He knew the rulers wanted him broken, and the soldiers wanted him gone, but what he did not know was that betrayal was already being prepared in the shadows. Kellen, the jealous officer, had been watching Daniel for weeks. He hated the way the human refused to bend. He hated the quiet strength Daniel carried, and most of all, he hated the strange bond between Daniel and the alien slave. To Kellen, it was a stain on the honor of every soldier. So he planned a trap, one that would end Daniel and expose Lyra as dangerous. It began one morning when guards stormed into Daniel's small room. Lyra jumped to her feet, her eyes wide with fear. The guards grabbed her roughly, pulling her to the floor. "She's accused of spying," one shouted. "Caught with secret messages meant for traitors." Daniel's eyes blazed. "That is a lie," he growled. But the guards shoved him back, sneering. "Do not protect her, human. Your shame is enough. Do not make it worse." Lyra cried out. "I have done nothing," her voice breaking. But they twisted her arms, dragging her into the street. The crowd gathered quickly, eager for drama. "See?" they shouted. "The slave is a spy. She was never worth even $5. Daniel fought through the guards, his fists burning with rage. "She is innocent," he shouted, his voice echoing. "You planted this on her." But the rulers, sitting high above the crowd, only smiled, enjoying the spectacle. Kellen stepped forward, holding up a small piece of paper. "This was found under her bed," he declared. "Proof she is in contact with enemies." The crowd gasped, some spitting, others laughing. Daniel's voice thundered. "I searched that room myself. You planted it." But no one listened. The people wanted blood. They wanted the show. Lyra's knees buckled, fear drowning her. She whispered, "They will kill me, Daniel." And in her trembling voice, Daniel heard the echo of all the years she had suffered, all the times no one defended her. But this time was different. This time she was not alone. Daniel stepped in front of her, his body a shield. "If you touch her, you will face me," he growled. The crowd fell silent, shocked that he would stand against his own kind for her. Kellen smirked. "You would throw away your life for a slave?" Daniel's eyes burned with fire. "I would," he said without hesitation. The rulers shifted uneasily. They had expected him to be humiliated, not defiant. They had expected Lyra to be silent, not defended. The balance of their power trembled, and they did not like it. Still, the trial moved forward. The rulers announced that Lyra would be judged by fire at dawn. If she survived, she was innocent. If she burned, she was guilty. The crowd cheered, eager for blood, eager for the spectacle. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew it was no trial, it was murder. And if he stayed silent, he would lose her forever. That night, locked in a small cell, Lyra sat trembling, her hands cold, her eyes filled with despair. "I will die tomorrow," she whispered. "Just like they planned all along." Daniel knelt beside her, his voice firm. "No, you will not." Her eyes widened. "But they are too strong. We cannot fight them. Daniel shook his head. I have faced armies. I have faced death. I will face them again if I must. For the first time, Lyra looked at him not as a soldier, not as a master, but as something more. Her heart whispered words she dared not speak. Outside, the colony buzzed with excitement. The people sharpened their cruelty, ready to watch the girl burn. But beneath their laughter and cheer, whispers of doubt spread. Why would a human soldier defend her so fiercely if she was truly worthless? Why would he stand against his own people if there was not something hidden? The seeds of suspicion began to grow. At dawn, the fire pit was lit, flames rising into the air. The guards dragged Lyra forward, her body weak but her spirit unbroken. Daniel walked beside her, chains on his wrists, but his eyes sharp as steel. The rulers announced her crime, their voices booming. But before they could throw her to the fire, Daniel stepped forward, his voice louder than the crowd. This is no trial, he shouted. This is murder, and everyone here knows it. The crowd gasped, silence falling. The rulers glared. Silence, human, or you will burn with her. Daniel's jaw tightened, his voice steady. Then let me burn. Because I will not let you kill her. The flames crackled, the air thick with tension. For the first time, the crowd hesitated. They had come for blood, but what they saw instead was courage. The courage of a man ready to die for a slave worth only $5, and deep in the heart of that moment, a shift began. The punishment meant to humiliate Daniel had become something else. The bond between him and Lyra was no longer hidden. No longer weak, it was strong, unshaken, and dangerous to those who ruled. And as the fire roared, the trail burned brighter. Not Daniel's betrayal, not Lyra's, but the betrayal of a system built on cruelty. A system that would soon face its reckoning. The fire burned high, its heat pressing against the faces of the crowd. Lyra stood trembling near the edge, her chains rattling with every step. Daniel stood in front of her, his own wrists bound, yet his body unyielding. The rulers expected fear, they expected begging, but instead they saw defiance. And the crowd, once laughing, now watched in silence. Unsure of what they truly wanted, the alien leader raised his hand. Throw her in, he commanded. The guards moved forward, but Daniel blocked their way. His voice thundered like a storm. She is innocent, he shouted, and you all know it. The guards hesitated, unsure. The strength in his voice pierced even their cruelty. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers spreading like wildfire. Why would he protect her? Some asked, what truth do they hide from us? Kellen stepped forward, sneering. You disgrace your kind, Daniel. You are a traitor to your own blood. Daniel glared back, his eyes sharp. No, Kellen, it is you who disgraces us, you. Who bends your knee to lies. Gasps echoed through the square. The rulers' faces darkened with fury, but Lyra, trembling behind him, felt something she had not felt in years, hope. Her voice broke the silence, soft yet clear. I was born of noble blood, she said. My father was a leader who wanted peace. The crowd stirred, murmurs rising. They killed him, betrayed him, sold me like an animal. And now they call me a spy. Her eyes glistened in the firelight, her voice trembling but strong. You call me filth, but it is they who are. Afraid, because I know the names of traitors, the rulers shouted for silence, their voices desperate. Lies, they barked. The girl is delusional. Her words mean nothing. But the damage was done. The crowd had heard, and doubt had taken root. For years they had obeyed without question. But now, before their eyes, a broken slave spoke with the strength of truth. And beside her stood a human soldier willing to die for her. Daniel pulled at his chains until the metal cut into his wrists, his voice steady. You wanted to punish me, to humiliate me, but instead you revealed your own weakness. He turned to the crowd. Look at her, look at what they did to her, and ask yourself, are you proud to serve those who fear the truth? The crowd fell into uneasy silence, torn between fear and awakening. The alien leader roared. Enough. his voice cracking with rage. "Kill them both." The guards stepped forward, but this time the crowd did not cheer. Some even stepped back, their faces pale, their hearts uncertain. For the first time, the ruler's power did not feel unshakable. For the first time, the people saw that fear could be broken. At that moment, chaos erupted. One of the guards, moved by Lyra's words, hesitated and dropped his weapon. The others shouted at him, but his trembling voice carried. "She speaks the truth." The crowd gasped, tension snapping like a whip. Daniel seized the moment, swinging his bound wrists hard into Kellen's jaw, knocking him to the ground. The guards rushed forward, but the hesitation had already spread. The fire meant to burn Lyra became the spark of rebellion. In the confusion, Daniel pulled Lyra away from the flames, his grip strong. "Run," he whispered, but she shook her head. "No, not without you." Together they fought through the chaos, the crowd surging, guards shouting, rulers screaming. For control, for every hand that tried to stop them, another hand turned away, unwilling to obey. The chain of fear was breaking link by link. They escaped into the dark streets, hearts pounding, breaths ragged. The fire still burned in the square, but behind them the colony trembled with unrest. Lyra stumbled, but Daniel caught her, his voice firm. "You are not alone anymore," he said. "We will fight this together." Tears slid down her cheeks, but they were not tears of despair. For the first time, they were tears of belief. That night, in the safety of a hidden corner, Lyra spoke again. "They will not stop hunting us," she whispered, "but we have something they fear more than death." Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady. "The truth," he said. She nodded. "And our bond," her voice softened. "They cannot break what has already been broken and rebuilt." Daniel reached for her hand, and she did not pull away. In the silence of the night, their fingers intertwined. What began as punishment had become something the rulers could never have predicted. A bond forged not from humiliation, but from courage, trust, and something deeper, something the rulers feared more than rebellion. Hope. The turning point had come. The rulers still held power, their armies still strong, but their grip had slipped. The people had seen a slave speak like a queen, and a soldier stand like a shield, and once seen, it could never be unseen. The fire had not burned Lyra, it had lit the beginning of something far greater. A storm was coming, and Daniel and Lyra stood at the heart of it. Together, they would face what came next. Together, they were no longer broken. Together, they were unshakable. The night of fire became the beginning of whispers that spread through every corner of the colony. People spoke of the human soldier who stood against his own kind. They spoke of the slave girl who revealed secrets, and they spoke of the rulers, whose power trembled for the first time in years. What was meant to be punishment had become a spark of change, and though the rulers tried to silence it, the truth could not be contained. Daniel and Lyra hid in the shadows for many days, moving from place to place, surviving on little food, but never losing hope. Daniel watched over her like a shield, and Lyra, once broken and silent, began to carry herself with a strength he had never seen before. Each night, she spoke more of her past, telling him the names of traitors, the maps of secret places, the stories of her people, and Daniel listened, not just as a soldier, but as someone who believed in her. The bond between them was no longer hidden, no longer fragile, it was unshakable. But danger followed Kellen, bitter and bruised from his humiliation. Swore vengeance, he hunted them, leading soldiers through alleys and ruins, determined to end the story before it could grow. Daniel knew they could not hide forever. They had to face the rulers. They had to show the people the truth. So one night, under the cover of darkness, Daniel turned to Lyra. "We cannot keep running," he said. "If they catch us, we die like criminals. But if we rise, we live like leaders." Lyra's eyes widened, fear and courage clashing within her. "You mean to fight them?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Not just with weapons, but with truth." The next day, The marketplace was crowded, people shouting, trading, and laughing. And then, suddenly, Daniel's voice rang out, strong and unshaken. "People of the colony," he shouted. "Listen." The noise of the market fell silent. All eyes turning to him. Beside him, Lyra stepped forward, her chains still clinging to her wrists, but her voice carried like a queen. "I am Lyra, daughter of a noble family, heir to a name you were told was erased," she declared. Gasps filled the air. Whispers rushed from mouth to mouth. "They betrayed my father. They killed him. They sold me to hide their crimes," she continued, her voice trembling yet fierce. "And this human, this man they tried to humiliate, stood by me when no one else would." The ruler's guards rushed forward, but the crowd moved too. For the first time, the people stepped between the guards and those they were ordered to kill. The rulers shouted for control, their voices angry and desperate. But it was too late. The crowd had seen courage, they had heard truth, and they no longer wished to bow. Kellen pushed through with fury, his blade drawn. "You will die here." He snarled at Daniel. Daniel met him head on, chains still on his wrists, but his will stronger than iron. Their fight was brutal, fists and blades clashing. The crowd shouting. Lyra cried out, but she did not run. She picked up a fallen spear and stood ready. When Kellen lunged at Daniel, it was Lyra who struck, her blow sending him crashing to the ground. The people roared, the rulers trembled, and the guards hesitated, no longer certain who truly held power. In that moment, the colony changed. The rulers, once untouchable, now faced a crowd united by anger and hope. The guards lowered their weapons, some even kneeling. The leaders shouted in rage, but their voices no longer carried weight. It was over. The old chains had broken. Days later, the colony was no longer ruled by fear. Daniel and Lyra stood before the people, not as prisoner and slave, but as symbols of something greater. Daniel, the human soldier once mocked as a fool, and Lyra, the slave once worth $5, were now leaders of a new beginning. They worked side by side to rebuild what had been broken. Lyra taught the people the wisdom of her family, the forgotten songs, the strength of unity. Daniel trained them in discipline, courage, and justice. Together, they were not just survivors, they were builders of a future. The same crowd that once laughed now cheered. The same people who once spat at Lyra now bowed their heads in respect. And at the heart of it all, Daniel and Lyra looked at each other, their bond unshaken by chains or flames. Their marriage, born as punishment, had become the strongest bond of their lives. Not forced, not broken, but chosen. Chosen every day, in every word, in every glance. One evening, as the sun set beyond the colony, painting the sky with fire and gold, Daniel and Lyra stood side by side. The wind carried laughter from children playing, the market alive with music instead of cruelty. Lyra leaned against him, her voice soft. "Do you remember what they said? That I was worth only $5. Daniel smiled, his hand resting on hers. "I remember," he said. "But they were wrong." She looked at him, her eyes glowing with peace. "What am I worth now?" Daniel kissed her forehead gently, his voice steady. "Everything," he whispered. And in that moment, surrounded by freedom and hope, Daniel and Lyra knew the truth. The punishment that was meant to destroy them had given them the greatest gift of all: love, trust, and a future built together. They were no longer slaves to fate, no longer prisoners of cruelty. They were free, and above all, they were happier than ever. Asterisk.